Hello everyone and welcome to CareersTalk. I'm Sunil Sharma, an agile consultant based in Netherlands. And at CareersTalk, we invite industry experts from around the world to share their real experience with us. And in today's session, we will be covering Scrum Master interview questions shared by our WhatsApp group member, which were asked in Ernst& Young, which is EY. And to help us with this, we have David Spinks, a professional Scrum trainer based in UK. But before we start, make sure to subscribe for more informative session like this. And if you find the content valuable, don't forget to hit that like button. So without further delay, let's dive in. Welcome, David. David, over to you. David.
Thank you, Sanan. Thank you for the introduction. It's great to be here and looking forward to our conversation. So I'll just introduce myself a little bit. As you mentioned, I'm a professional Scrum trainer with scrum.org. I'm based in the UK. I'm also a Kanban University trainer as well. So I like to look at Agile from lots of different perspectives, build up, a different group of tools to
Wonderful.
help organizations and teams, not just with Scrum, but lots of different ways of being Agile. I actually started my career as a software developer. So I did that for about 10 years before I moved into becoming a Scrum Master. And that was, crikey, about 15 years ago now. So been in and around Agile teams for quite a long time.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So if you allow, shall we start?
Let's dive in.
Okay. So the very first question is, if a Scrum Master is unavailable during the daily Scrum, and let's say an impediment comes and impediment arises, so how would you ensure the team has a process in place to manage these kind of scenarios? Like,
Mm-hmm.
how would you improve the future communication about these impediments? Yeah.
Okay. It's an interesting question, and the question assumes that the daily Scrum is there for impediment management, which I think is something to be a little bit aware of. And I think Scrum Masters should look at the daily Scrum as it's the developers' meeting. It's their meeting for them to synchronize every day, to align on their plan, to look at their progress towards the sprint goal, and to adjust their plan as necessary. That might include talking about impediments, but I don't want Scrum Masters to be coaching teams to think the daily meeting is the place where impediments are brought up. I want those impediments jumped upon as soon as possible. So I think, yes, the daily Scrum is a useful place to raise the impediments, raising transparency, but I want discussions to be ongoing throughout the day and not people waiting to the daily Scrum to report them. Again, there's lots of ways that teams can do this. My job as a Scrum Master is to facilitate the conversation with the developers on how are we going to do this, right? Again, I want to promote self-management as a team. So maybe in a retrospective or some other workshop, we can agree our policies. For example, if I'm stuck, if I'm got a particular problem with a piece of code, or if I'm doing software or some test which I just can't get running, whatever it is, right? What is the policy we do there? Do I try for a half an hour before I get some help? Do we have a senior person in the team that we refer to? It's not my job as a Scrum Master to tell the team what they should do, but what is my job is to facilitate a conversation around how is that ongoing communication? What are our policies? What we do when we bump into impediments? So, in terms of the question, I think if we're treating the daily Scrum as the place and the Scrum Master as that one impediment remover, the Scrum Master's job is to make sure that impediments are being managed, i.e., facilitating conversations so the team can self-manage to solve them themselves. That's what I think is a great Scrum Master. Does that make sense? Does that answer the question, do you think?
Yes, sorry, it takes some time to unmute. Yes, yes, wonderful. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so if I have to summarize, basically we have to empower our team to handle all, if not all, but yeah, impediments as and when they came, and we should encourage to resolve impediment independently as much as possible. But of course, Scrum Master is always there to help them, to guide them as and when it's required. So yeah, maybe some kind of escalation processes if it's required, something like that, we can put it into place again as agreed with our team. So yeah, that's
Yeah, and I would also add a great Scrum Master. Make sure that they're observing, their presence, they are available throughout the day. Obviously, you might get dragged into meetings and things, but if the Scrum Master's not available for the whole day, or that there's something wrong, they need to make themselves available for the team as things come up.
great, wonderful. Okay, so let's move on to our next question. And the next question is on the stakeholders. So let's say your stakeholders claim that they lack visibility into the product backlog and the upcoming priorities. So as a Scrum Master, what practical steps would you take to make sure that the backlog is fully transparent and
Mhm.
accessible with minimize overhead?
Okay.
So yeah.
Um, so as a Scrum Master, it's important that you're working closely with the product owner here. According to the rules of Scrum, the product owner is the one who is accountable for the product backlog, and that includes making it transparent and visible to the stakeholders. So I shouldn't be doing anything independently here as a Scrum Master. How can I coach that product owner? How can I work with those stakeholders? Again, the context matters here. Is everybody working remotely? Are people in the office? Have I got a hybrid situation going on here? So I've got to understand the particular context within we are working. The other thing that I would say about this is transparency doesn't just mean visible. So just because we got something on a file share somewhere in a spreadsheet, or we've got a product backlog in Jira that we can point people towards, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's transparent. Transparent means that people understand it. They can look at it, they can look at the contents, they can look at product backlog items. Stakeholders can read the product backlog items and understand the content. If it's technical speak, like if there's a product backlog item, which is, I don't know, update database table XYZ, add foreign key to field Z, right? That's not transparent. It's there, it's visible, but they can't understand what it is. So part of transparency of the product backlog is it's available, people can get to it. It's written in language that stakeholders can understand. The product backlog items should represent units of value to those stakeholders as well. Like I say, that example that I gave you, updating the database, that's a task that the team does. That's not really a product backlog item. And again, I'm hampering transparency by putting tasks on the product backlog. Okay, so again, it's making sure that that product backlog is in that shared language. Part of this as well is that collaboration and ongoing communication with stakeholders. The sprint review is the event where stakeholders have got the opportunity to give feedback, to give input to the Scrum team, to the product owner. And according to the rules of Scrum, the result of sprint review is an adapted product backlog. So there's your meeting, there's your chance in real time to make adjustments to the product backlog, to give transparency, because you're having that conversation with stakeholders there. And that's the formal opportunity in Scrum to do it. Other than that, again, there's lots of different techniques. Again, it's talking to the stakeholders. What do you need? Do you need electronic access? Do you need a physical board that you can walk up to? So again, we've got to think about stakeholders' needs here. Other things I would also add is the product backlog is just an ordered list of everything that's known to be needed for the product. Right, an ordered list of everything that's known to be needed. It doesn't mean it has to be a one-dimensional list in a spreadsheet or in a Jira board, right? So again, Scrum teams can get creative on how they capture what's needed. I would point people towards user story mapping, for example. Impact mapping is another tool. So there's lots of tools out there to capture what do we need in the products to make it visible. Okay, so again, it's experimenting, but again, I think my number one rule is, again, working with the product owner and the stakeholders and understanding their needs, and hopefully trying to cater for those needs and problems that they've got. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely, completely. Okay, great. Thank you. Let's move on. Okay, so the next question is, and again, I think it's a kind of real scenario which happened with a lot of people. So let's say the developer has completed a significant backend work, but then they struggle to present it into the sprint review. So how would you guide your team to communicate your progress effectively to the stakeholders?
Mhm. So a big part of Scrum is transparency. Okay. And a really important part of Scrum is this idea of done, the definition of done, right? And we talk about done means we've taken a product backlog item and we've turned it into an increment. There's no remaining work in order to return the value. Scrum is very clear on this, right? The product backlog items, as I said earlier, should represent units of value, right? If I've got a front end piece of work and a back end piece of work, for me, they are tasks. Unless they actually give value to end customers, end users, and stakeholders, they are tasks, they're not product backlog items. So if I've got a piece of work that requires front end work and back end work, and only the back end work is or done, or only the front end work is done, right? That unit of value is not done. The product backlog item is done. So Scrum is really clear on this, right? It's a binary question, right? A product backlog item is either done or it's not done, right? It's either yes. So in order to be transparent to our stakeholders, the answer is simple. It's not finished. It's not done. We might have done the back end work, but if there's still outstanding front end work or middleware work, right? We can't, again, because of the uncertainty of the type of work that we're doing, we're not being fully transparent by trying to guess how much work we've got done. Who knows, right? We might have done the back end coding, but what about when the front end work is done and we're trying to test end to end? That might show problems, right? So I shouldn't really report the back end work as done until everything that needs to integrate together has been proven to work together. And I've met that definition of done. Okay.
Absolutely, absolutely.
One other thing I would say, if I do have a unit of value which only requires backend work, right, then that's maybe a different discussion. How can I demonstrate that to the stakeholder? How do I demonstrate the value to the stakeholders, right? I've sat in many sprint reviews myself where I've had developers kind of going into the integrated development environments, they're going to databases, they're showing code, and stakeholders just don't understand what's going on. You got to think about the audience, right? So if I'm trying to demonstrate backend work is done, the question that I would ask the developers is, how did you know that it was done? How did you test it? What did you prove? And it's usually things like test scripts, like with this input, we expect this output. If I make this change, I expect this data to show up in the database. So show your test, don't show the code, because that's what stakeholders are not going to understand. But ideally, like I say, most units of value is something, there's going to be an interface that stakeholders can kind of play with. So again, move away from this idea of back-end work and front-end work to units of value. And that's the thing that we want to get done and demonstrate to stakeholders in the sprint review.
Wonderful. I just want to add one point over here, if you allow me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So basically, when we face this kind of, like when I face this kind of challenges, so we encourage the team to translate the technical work into the business terms.
Mm-hmm.
So while backend work might not be always visible to the stakeholders, but then teams should highlight the value it brings. So for example, let's say the backend change which we have made improve the system performance by 20%, which means faster response time for the customer, something like that. So they understand, okay, what actually is happening, right? Or let's say we implemented the infrastructure that will enable the new features like XYZ in the next sprint. So they know, okay, what value creation which we have done in their own business terms. I think that's something which we can do. And apart from
Mm-hmm.
that, also if we can, as you also mentioned, like if we can use some visual aids, like maybe we can use some flow diagrams or data models or architectural diagrams that show the relationship between different parts of the systems. So even though the backend work might not be easily demoed, but then visuals can show the impact of the work done. So that thing worked for us in the past. So just want to add on top
Mm-hmm.
of it whatever you mentioned. And of course, the work done, the definition of done, it's of course very important. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I would also add as well, my ideal in an organization is that we are doing back-end work in reaction to a request for value. a customer request, a stakeholder needs something, they're seeing that the application is running slow, right? So we are then doing that back-end work to serve that request effectively, right? I uh, I hesitate to see it as a good, healthy Scrum implementation where developers are doing work and then having to justify how it gives business value.
Absolutely.
Right. I want it to be the other way around. I want the business to come to the team and say, right, this is what it would be valuable to our customers, to our stakeholders. And then the developers kind of like serving those needs. It's about serving the needs of the stakeholders and the customers, not developers justifying why they're doing work and adding value.
Absolutely. But in a real world, we have all kind of stakeholders. So yeah. But yeah, I think it's wonderful point which you have made. Great. Great. Let's move on our next question. And next question is on velocity. So a team is too much focus on improving the velocity at the expense of their technical excellence. So how would you shift the focus to the meaningful matrices that drive the sustainable delivery over the period of time?
Mm-hmm.
So it's again a kind of anti patterns which we have seen in a couple of teams. So I think that's a good question to ask. Yeah,
Yeah,
David.
yeah. It depends a little bit where this drive for velocity is coming from. Is there management pressure? Is this just something that the team is looking to drive themselves? I want to kind of understand why velocity is important to people. There's a book I read a couple of days ago from the guy called Clark Ching, who does a lot of work in the theory of constraint space. And there's a line from it that I remember. I can't quote it word for word, but it was basically, if something looks stupid, right, don't make assumptions. If something looks stupid, it we shouldn't just get rid of it. You know, this focus on velocity is there for some reason. Understand the reason first. Why is it there? And then we can start to challenge the assumption behind it and start talk about, right, is there a better way? Okay, my personal approach as a coach, like I say, I want to understand why velocity is important to certain people. It could be, for example, management are using it as a performance measure on the team. We want to know how much stuff the teams get, how productive they are. Okay, things like that. Great. That gives me an understanding as to why that's being asked for. Then we can start asking the question: is there a better measure than velocity for what you want? Velocity, story points, they're great planning tools for teams to think about how much can we take into the next sprint. But in a lot of organizations, my experience is story points and velocity have started to be used for things that they weren't intended for. And there are other better measures and metrics out there. So to answer the question, so you might want to look at something like evidence-based management. There's an EBM guide from scrum.org, and what scrum.org and the PST community and Ken Schwabel were trying to do with that was to focus on value measures and metrics, right? Velocity only tells you about output. How many story points did we get done? How many user stories completed? But it says nothing about whether
Well,
those user stories were valuable or not. Okay. In my experience, because organizations don't know about alternatives and they heard about velocity, that's the only thing that they're being given. So I'm not going to attack that thing. I'm not going to say it's wrong, you shouldn't do that. What I want to do is start providing some alternatives. Right? This is something that we talk about in the Kanban movement a lot. Right? Um,
sorry to interrupt. Can I ask you about the alternatives apart from this velocity? Like, what do you
yeah,
think? Technical depth, code quality, defect per sprint, or
yeah, exactly. Again, I want to. I, I always try to bring it back to your end user and customer. I'm talking about the end customer user. Not, I mean, what stakeholders care about is important, but what do the end customer care about most? Right? A lot of organizations are swamped in measures and metrics. That's the other extreme, where you ask an organization, tell me about your KPIs, and the list off 6, 7, 8, 9, right? I always ask the question, what is the one thing that your customers care about most? That should be the central focus. So it could be something like lead time. How long does it take from us to request something for us to get that request fulfilled? Right. It could be something like customer satisfaction scores. You're probably aware of these, right? You use an app or website and you get a little survey afterwards. Give us a mark out of 10. How satisfied are you with your experience? Would you recommend it to something else? So that could be a focus for a Scrum team. Usage, measuring, putting in analytics into your products and looking at the relative amounts of usage in different parts of your product. Market share, how much of the market have you captured? These are just examples of things that we talk about in the EBM of what is actually valuable, focusing on those things. And like I say, if we start to bring that to the table, stakeholders should care about that stuff more than velocity. All right, so I've seen it before where some agile coaches, some scrum masters will say velocity is bad, stop measuring teams, but we've got to give people another measure that will help us to understand the value that the scrum team is providing. And again, that's going to be quite context specific. But yeah, there's some examples, but again, my advice is like, can you take it not to what just stakeholders care about, but your end customers?
Absolutely. Wonderful. Yeah. Great, David. Thank you for that. Okay. Let's move on to our next question. And next question is, as a Scrum Master, how would you define and measure the success in your role? So that's again, yeah, most of the time we encounter this kind of questions.
Yeah, good question. This is a tricky one because as a Scrum Master, your success is basically measured by the success of
Of your
others,
teams or your organization
of your
goals or
team,
something.
as your
Yeah,
organization. Yeah. So again, it goes a little bit back to what I was talking about before. You could say a team whose velocity is going up, I'm a successful Scrum Master there, right? But the team might be going faster, but are they accruing technical debts at the same time? So again, it's important as a Scrum Master to be focused or helping stakeholders and the product owner and the team to focus on value measures. So you probably need, a number of different ones coming at things from different perspectives. I mentioned lead time before, right? But if I obsess just by trying to reduce lead time, am I doing so at the cost of technical debt, for example? So I think it's important that we start to introduce context specific measures and metrics that are making sure that we're not breaking stuff while we're optimizing other things. But again, these are value based measures and metrics. I remember talking to a Scrum team several years ago now, some research that I was doing, talking to different Scrum teams in different parts of the world. And I asked that question to one team. I asked, again, how do you know that you're that you're successful? How do you measure it? And their answer was, we measure our success by the size of the smile on our customer's face.
that's wonderful.
Which is a nice metaphor, right? Behind that though is these things that I'm talking about, they're generally harder to measure. But again, that's how one of the ways I think as a Scrum Master you can start to demonstrate the impact that you're having through not just qualitative but some quantitative measures. Team happiness, you can health checks, those sorts of things. I mentioned NPS for customers. You can do an ENPS, employee satisfaction. Is that going up over time? So those sorts of things. But at the end of the day, it's really about delivery and value to customers as well.
Absolutely. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, looks like we are halfway through our session. So whoever is watching, if you are still here, please take a moment to hit that like button. And if you're not subscribed yet, please do that. And yeah, now that you have like and subscribe, let's move on to our next question, which is on leadership. So let's say your leadership asks you to evaluate the impact of an agile coach to a scaled environment. So what specific indicators would you use to measure their success? Again, it's somewhat, I think, related to the previous one, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's for agile coaches. Yeah.
Yeah, this is almost like let's say it's definitely related to the previous question. And I think It's almost like the same answer, really. It's regardless if you have got one Scrum team, if there's multiple Scrum teams, it all goes back to is value being added? Are the customers satisfied? What is important to the company? How do they measure success? And again, I would elaborate and add on to my previous answer. Are teams meeting their sprint goal every sprint? Are we making progress towards the product goal? Is there a clear mission that the Scrum teams are helping the organization towards, right? Or do those things even exist, right? So when it comes to scaling, again, it depends on why you are scaling in the first place. Do you have a product which is so complex that it requires multiple teams to work on, right? As you scale, you're going to start bumping into all sorts of other impediments, right? Dependencies. The ideal is that each Scrum team can work independently from each other. The reality is often different, though. It's very rare that you can get truly autonomous self-managing teams. So dependency management. Okay, so again, you're looking at things like how many delays are caused. Are the teams able to get to a done increment every sprint? So when it comes to scaling, all of the same Scrum rules apply. All right, in a nutshell, Scrum is about, can a Scrum team meet a sprint goal, which is a step towards a product goal, and deliver at least one done increment per sprint? And if they can't, what's stopping them? Okay, so the measure of success in a scaled environment is, can all of the teams, if they're working on the same product, can they integrate all of their work together every sprint to get a done increment for all of the teams? Are they meeting a sprint goal? And if they're not, are we rooting out the root causes and dealing with those impediments?
Wonderful. So if I have to summarize, or if I have to give it a little different perspective, so maybe we can break this into three different part, which is team level indicator, program level indicator, and maybe the organizational level indicator.
Mm-hmm.
So as you mentioned about the team level indicator, maybe we can look out for our team maturity and self-organization, right? So maybe we can assess our team ability to make their decision independently, maybe whether they are able to handle their conflict constructively, and then maybe they can able to maintain the accountability for their work. Maybe we can also measure the sprint goal, as you mentioned, whether
Mm-hmm.
how many sprint goals and the achievement rates and the stability of the velocity across the teams. And
Mm-hmm.
of course, at team level, then at program level, we can talk about cross team collaboration, as you mentioned, that we can evaluate the effectiveness of Scrum or any similar coordination events. We can look out for reducing the dependencies and the smoother handoff between the different teams. We can talk about program increment, let's say PI objective achievements or not over the period of time. We can track how consistently team deliver on the objective set during the PI planning events. And maybe about the value delivery matrices, as you mentioned, measure the lead time and the cycle time at the program level to ensure
Mm-hmm.
that we have a faster and a more consistent delivery of value, right? And the other thing is, maybe we can monitor the flow of features, because again, it's an important aspect when we talk about the scaling method, that we can monitor the flow of features through the program backlog to ensure that it's continuously progress over the period of time. And we can also maybe evaluate the clarity and the accessibility of the program level dashboards and the tools which are used to track different progresses, risk, or dependencies across the program. And in the third, like when we talk about organizational level indicators, maybe we can assess whether the work delivered is aligned with our organizational objective. For example, let's say faster time to market, or let's say improve customer satisfaction, or let's say innovation and things like that. And how fast we can respond to change, how agile we are in terms of responding to the change. So maybe we can also measure the organizational ability to adapt to the changing priorities. Maybe we have a reduced lead time for responding to market or the customer demands, and things like that. So yeah, I mean, I just want to add this, like in a summary form, whatever you mentioned. Yeah.
And I think everything you've mentioned, they are all different tools to help achieve the goal of delivering value to our customers, right? So again, if I
Absolutely.
need dashboards, if I need coordination, right? One thing that I see in organizations, and you mentioned it at the start of what you were talking about there, is, you know, how are things function at the team level? But a lot of organizations kind of stop there. I could be measuring, you know, if I've got, you know, teams that are dependent on each other, I might have, my point is, I might have individual teams or individual nodes in that network working quite efficiently, but I've got to step back. I've got to apply system thinking. I've got to worry about the end to end. So sometimes if there's a focus on individual at the team level, I see organizations maybe getting too focused on that and not stepping back and looking at the bigger picture. So the things that you mentioned there, you know, end-to-end lead time, program dashboards, not just at team level, but the whole thing. A lot of organizations get stuck kind of navel gazing and just looking to optimize at the team level, but you got to think about the system as a whole.
Great. Wonderful. Yeah. So thank you for that. And let's move on. We have still a lot of questions left. Okay. So the next question is one of your team member, let's say he's avoiding, constantly avoiding the commitments, and your
Mhm.
rest of the team members are frustrated. So as a scrum master, how would you manage this kind of situation to restore the team harmony and the accountability? Yeah.
Okay. This is a tricky one, and yeah, unfortunately, there's no real guide that says when this happens, this is what you need to do as a scrum master. So this is one of these it depends sort of scenarios. Again, the context matters here. For example, how how long have the team been together? How well do they work together? Because something I might choose to do as a scrum master, and it's a perfectly valid thing that you could do, is to do nothing. I'm going to sit back. I'm going to step back, and I'm giving the team an opportunity to hold each other accountable. Right, the accountabilities are clear in Scrum, and it is the developers as a collective, as a group, who are accountable for delivering. Are the rest of the developers going to hold this person to account and say, hey, you're not contributing, you're not pulling your weight? Are they going to have that conversation internally? Right. So a perfectly valid thing I could do as a scrum master is to just observe, right? Doing nothing is not a passive state. I'm observing and I'm giving the team space to see if they will, in a little bit like we talked about earlier with the impediments at the daily scrum. Can the team, this is just another impediment, can the team solve it themselves? If they can't, maybe the team, they're not at that level of maturity yet, or there's issues around the level of conflict. So again, this is where the context matters. If I understand the team is in a high level of conflict to the point where if they do talk to this person, it could erupt into World War III, right? I need to my job as a scrum master is to protect the health of the team. So maybe I do need to step in and take action if that is going to happen, if there's tension in the team. Right. Something I might do as a scrum master in a retrospective, for example, I might try to prompt the team into having that conversation. I might, for example, start the retrospective and refer to the scrum values. I might write up the word respect and commitment. These are our scrum values, team. Let's have a discussion. How well do we think the scrum values are being held? Discuss, right? I'm then trying to, are they going to bring that conversation up themselves? At the other end, if this is an ongoing problem, I'm trying to dangle that carrot in front of the team for them to start to try to self-manage. Or if I'm not seeing it happening, then of course that's when I might need to step in as a scrum master and then maybe do some one-to-one coaching with that individual. Maybe there's a good reason for this. Again, I'm reserving judgment. I'm not going in assuming the language here that they're avoiding their commitment. Right. All right. Where's the evidence? I need to have strong evidence that they're actually doing that. Right. Maybe there's a good reason. Maybe they don't have the right skills. Maybe they don't feel supported. Maybe there's something going on in their personal life. Right. But I'm reserving judgments to try to get to the root of the problem. I think most people that go to work want to do a good job. So again, I'm assuming that people have got good intent. I'm not assuming that they're a bad apple, but occasionally it does happen. Occasionally it does happen. So if I've done everything I can, I've had one-to-one coaching. If there's just a bad attitude, if the person says, "Oh, I don't like this whole scrum thing. I don't like collaborating with other people if they're not a good fit." Again, I'm trying to do everything I can through a coaching route. But again, my job as a scrum master is to protect the health of the team's ability to deliver a done increment every sprint to meet a sprint goal. And if this behavior is such an impediment at an extreme level, I've done everything I can, maybe this then needs to be escalated to their line manager, their HR manager. And maybe it's a case that they're not a good fit for the team. Okay, but I'm talking last resort here stuff. So yeah, lots of options. It depends very much on the context.
Okay, understood. Yeah, thank you. I think you have given a couple of good examples out there also. That's wonderful. Okay, let's move on to our next question. So, let's say the client or the PO, they frequently pressure the team to deliver the increment results outside the sprint cadence. So, how would you address these ad hoc requests as a Scrum Master? How are you going to protect your team?
Okay, so this is unplanned work, right?
Yeah,
Additional increments in addition to what's been planned for the
correct.
sprint. Okay.
Absolutely.
Um, okay. So there's probably an education piece here, maybe a misunderstanding of the contracts that effectively we take when we start doing a scrum, right? As stakeholders get flexibility on changing priorities on the product backlog in terms of their requests, working with the product owner to agree. The word scope creep doesn't really exist in Scrum or Agile. There's just the next most important thing, and reprioritization as we learn more, as we take an empirical approach. So the contract is, we've got that flexibility outside of the sprint. When we go into the sprints, we're going to allow the Scrum team to focus. Okay. However, in the real world, emergencies happen. There's unplanned work. There's things that have to be done. So, first thing, right, with a stakeholder, with a product owner, what we need to make transparent is this thing more important than the current sprint, right? Because if we take this unplanned work, and again, this is a conversation that we need to have. There is a danger that the sprint goal won't be met, right? So what I do, I avoid saying the word no to stakeholders. I say, thank you for your request. Just a minute, let's go to our sprint backlog. This is what's currently being worked on. This is our current sprint goal. Are you willing to risk this for your request? And if what they're requesting is got, is there's a different question if I've got multiple stakeholders. I'll come on to that in a second. But assuming that it's the CEO who should care about that, in my experience, 80% of the time, something like that, people will look at it and then say, "Oh, actually, finish the sprint. My thing can wait to the next sprint." The exception then comes though if that request is more important, right? We agree. This does have to be started now. Again, as a Scrum Master, as the product owner, we should not be pushing things into the sprint. I am breaking Scrum's self-management there by pushing this onto the team. So we need to have a conversation with the developers. It is a myth that we cannot take unplanned work into the sprint, but we need to ask the developers a couple of questions first. Question number one, if we take this unplanned work, will it impact the sprint goal? Question number two, if we take this unplanned work, will it impact our ability to meet the current increment that we're trying to deliver? Right. If the team says we can absorb this unplanned work and still meet the sprint goal and still deliver it, you can accept it. You can bring that work in and deal with that request. If the developers say sprint goal would be it's too risky, we wouldn't get the sprint goal done, then the rule in Scrum is we would cancel the sprint. Right. The assumption is the conversations that we've had is this request, this unplanned piece of work is more important than what we're doing now. So we cancel the sprint and go into a brand new sprint, taking in the new piece of work. Right. The other thing I would go back to is if I've got multiple stakeholders competing with each other. Right. This is now about, for me, it's about product backlog refinement and how work gets into the team. This is why the product owner accountability exists. I think about the product owner as facilitating conversations with different stakeholders, prioritizing, but making it transparent why the decisions that they're making as the final decision maker is as they are. Okay, what I want to embed into the culture is people are following a process that is only one way really to get work into the team, and that's through the product backlog, ordered by the product owner. All right, and if something is gonna circumvent that process, there has to be a route there, because there's going to be unplanned, there's going to be emergencies, right? But there has to be clear policies in place that say this is the criteria that must be met for it to be escalated into the team effectively. So again, it's about, like, say, having those clear rules in place. And what I don't want is it just being a case of, like, because people are shouting loudly or because they are high ranked in the organization. So yeah,
Absolutely.
it's a very common one, but yeah, that's
No,
my
that's
answer.
glad. Like you have covered a lot of scenarios. Yeah, that's wonderful, David. Thank you. Okay, let's move on. So next question is on retrospective, and I think it's a very interesting one. So let's say your team views the retrospective as boring, or let's say unproductive. So how would you, as a Scrum Master, can demonstrate the value of retrospective, and how you can encourage the active participation, and maybe that there might be something wrong as a Scrum Master which you are doing, which is an indicator that you also have to work on yourself, maybe on a little bit on a techniques or the way you are helping your team with the retrospective. So yeah, David,
Yeah.
let's hear from you. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, there's a lot of options here depending on the context. Again, this is something that we talk about in the facilitation class from scrum.org. It's something we talked about in the facilitation book that I co-authored as well. It doesn't have to be the Scrum Master that facilitates. Right? Maybe an option is different team members take turns to facilitate the retrospective, right? The Scrum Master is part of the Scrum team. Maybe them being a participant in a retrospective might be an interesting approach. You mentioned that the retrospective might be regarded as boring, maybe because the same format is being used each time. So there's great resources out there. There's the book by Esther Darby and Diana Larson on retrospectives. There's Liberating Structures. There's all sorts of resources out there on how you can facilitate retrospectives in different ways. Maybe open group discussions isn't always the best way. Maybe doing some sort of convergent, divergent thinking where people break out into small groups and come back together. The other thing I'll say about this, maybe I suppose there's a couple of things that could be happening. One could be that the team has been together for a while and they have run out of improvement ideas. Right, this is where, as a Scrum Master, I need to start challenging the team on how do they take it to the next level. I want to get them off that plateau and take them to an even higher level of performance. And again, this is where I might be using coaching questions here. I'm asking the teams, like, how often are we releasing? At the end of every sprint? Great. That's good. How can we increase that, right? There's no rule in Scrum that the release has to be at the end of the sprint. What would it take for us to be able to release every week, once a day, right? There are really great agile organizations that are releasing lots of small changes continuously. Can we move towards more of a continuous delivery or continuous deployment? What we need to make that happen? Are our customers happy? Right? Are we measuring that? right? How are we measuring that? So maybe we need to get closer to our customers and stakeholders and understand their needs better. What's our level of technical debt? How robust and resilient do we think our products are? Right? They might be functioning very well, but if there is a if there's technical debt lurking there, how do we even know that? How are we measuring that? So these are just examples of prompts, of questions that I might be asking the team to set up a retrospective. If I see that they're kind of plateauing a little bit, I want to ask powerful questions to try to prompt them to the next level of improvement. And there's usually something. Things are always changing. There's usually like changes, new technologies to investigate, new techniques to try. Understanding customers in a different way. The other thing I would say on this is the opposite, where a team is they've got impediments, they've got problems, but it's outside of their control. There's certain things that the team can change, but they're limited on their self-management, and it's organizational impediments. This is again where a scrum master needs to go beyond looking at the team, working with other scrum masters, working with leadership, working with management. Maybe we're kind of back to the scaling discussion, right? How do we scale beyond impediments from the team to an escalation route outside of that? We're going beyond the basics rules of scrum here, but and into sort of organizational agility. But where's the escape route for impediments that teams cannot deal with, that the organization needs to support them with? So how do I sort of set that up? Maybe some sort of retrospective or retrospectives or management meeting or an operations week, whatever you call it. But how can I start to encourage that to be set up in the organization?
Wonderful. Great, David. Yeah. Thank you for that. Okay. So now we came to last question of the day. And I think this is a little tricky one. So let's say multiple teams, they work on a interconnected products with overlapping dependency. So how would you implement a framework to align teams and to improve the overall productivity of this particular program? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, tricky one to finish on. So my advice is, so Scrum talks about having cross-functional self-managing teams as much as possible. It prescribes that because one of the things that really slows organizations down is dependencies. So that's why Scrum has this idea of an autonomous, cross-functional, self-managing team, so that they're not dependent on other teams, because that's one of the things that will really slow organizations down. So in this case, I think it's really important that the organization really thinks about how it defines product. What does a product mean? And it seems like a simple question, but when you start to look at it, it's like, how do I have, you mentioned we've got an interconnected group of products, right? But how do I draw the boundaries of that set of interconnected products in such a way that I'm minimizing the dependencies and I'm forming the teams around that? So for example, maybe our product is a car, right? I could define my product as a car, right? That's what the end customer might be buying, right? But in terms of setting up teams, it might make sense that I've got the engine Scrum team, I've got the body Scrum team, I've got the steering wheel Scrum team. Yes, these things need to integrate. And again, it's about having clear definitions of the contract between different things. So in terms of software, we're talking about having APIs, things like that, right? So contracts between, I don't know, the middleware and the backend and a database, for example. Okay, so that's one way to do it, right? Another way is to think about, would it make sense to think about slices? I might have a team which is maybe my my teams are building an e-commerce website. I might have a team with back-end team members, front-end team members, middleware team members, but they're responsible for one part of the customer journey. like searching for products. I might have a different team responsible for purchasing. Okay, so I can slice it that way, right? And the interconnectedness is about the steps on the customer journey, right? It's a difficult problem. There's not a single best answer. But again, my job as a Scrum Master is to facilitate the conversation with the right people, the right experts, to think about how can we set the teams up? How can we define the products in such a way that we minimize these dependencies as much as possible? In terms of particular frameworks, at scrum.org, we've got the Nexus framework. I quite like that. It mentions about there's something called a Nexus integration team, which involves having team members from all of the Scrum teams, where their primary accountability is to help to minimize the dependencies across teams. So this is through good product backlog refinements, helping to identify which team might be working on which part of the product. So that's one strategy. You've got the less approach, you've got Scrum at scale, you've got safe. So there's lots of different strategies. I mean, Kanban's got its own way of dealing with scaling. So it's again a little bit like I was talking about at the start. A great Scrum Master will be looking beyond the basics of Scrum to understand different strategies to deal with different scenarios.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you, David, for that elaborated answer. Wonderful. Great. And I think with this, we came to end of the session. So thank you, David, for being with us and sharing your knowledge. And friends, if you enjoyed today's session, don't forget to hit and like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more. Definitely, we'll have more session with David in future. So until next time, take care. Bye-bye. And thank you, David, one more time.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.